This is a video tutorial on the Oz primary flight display. For more information on Oz or to download and try the simulator yourself, you can visit our website at www.fly-esky.com. Before we move on to explaining the workings of Oz, let's review some of the current presentations of information in the cockpit environment. Here we see the classic analog setup, also commonly referred to as steam gauges or the six-pack. The six-pack is in reference to the 6 primary flight instruments in the center of the instrument panel, namely the airspeed indicator, attitude indicator, altimeter, vertical speed indicator, directional gyro, and also the turn and slip coordinator. Now, one of the problems with the analog setup is that each instrument is dedicated to one state variable of the aircraft. As a result, you have a multitude of gauges which are distributed across the panel, and it's impossible for any pilot to read all these gauges simultaneously. Instead, what he or she has to do is selectively scan different instruments for different phases of flight and build up a mental picture of what's going on in the aircraft. This requires a lot of cognitive processes to get a good mental picture of the current performance of the airplane. So next, we moved away from that paradigm and went from analog into the digital flight display. And so what we did by doing this was solve the problem of instrumentation reliability because we got rid of all those mechanical instruments, but we did not fundamentally address the issue of how to better present information in the cockpit to the pilot. Notice that as a pilot, we still have to scan the digital screen to build up a mental picture of what's going on in the aircraft. Essentially, we've replaced the round gauges with linear tapes for things like airspeed, attitude, altitude, and vertical speed. We still have a round digital display of the directional gyro. And on top of that, we now have more complication in the way of menus, buttons, and frequency and waypoint information on the top of the screen. So what if we could remove the entire step of scanning and simply give you a display which is exactly that mental picture from the start? This is precisely what the Oz display does. By design, Oz was developed by vision and physiological optic scientists at the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. The Oz display eliminates the scan because, as you can see, there are no dials, gauges, tapes, or numbers to read on the screen. In addition, Oz increases performance over that of conventional analog and glass flight displays. Finally, Oz dramatically improves situational awareness because it shows a full 360-degree panoramic view on a forward-looking display. For the first time, it is now possible to depict traffic and flight plan information on the primary flight display to get that full 360-degree situational awareness without having to divert your attention off the screen to a multifunction display or a traffic avoidance system. Everything is brought to you at your central focus of vision at the center of the screen. In order to understand how Oz works, we're going to break it down into 2 fundamental building blocks. The first building block is going to be the internal world, which corresponds to everything going on inside of the aircraft. So these graphics and symbols will correspond to things like the airspeed, altitude, power required, pitch attitude, and so on and so forth. Once we understand how these work, we'll move to the external world, which is essentially everything you see outside of the window. This will correspond to waypoints, runways, extensions of the runway center line, other traffic, and so on and so forth. Once we have a good handle on how both the internal and external world symbols work, we'll put all of that together and we'll utilize it by flying an instrument approach to KIXD in IMC Weather in Microsoft Flight Simulator 10. What you'll hopefully see is that it's substantially easier to fly a precise path to the ground in instrument weather with a low workload to the pilot. So now we can click on the yellow box at the top of the screen to see information on the internal world symbols.